Welcome Specimen. Today we are into a new reset, and as we get into a new reset, we are also getting one reset closer to the release of Season 4, the last season of this expansion. So now we have exactly three. We have 3 resets left before the release of Season 4. What we have to talk about for today is our update, our weekly update, which isn't as much of a weekly update, more like a week and a half update on Mythic Plus that we left behind a little bit, I think over 10 days ago, the last time we checked how Mythic Plus was going. We have gotten some recent changes, right? The balance tuning that was supposed to hit Destro lock that happened last week, that ended up delaying the nerfs of destruction to Season 4, and instead only buffed Guardian, Vengeance and Affliction Warlock. So we are going to be looking at if anything changes in that regard, plus the previous set of changes which buffed Arms, Outlaw, Windwalker, as well as Balanced Druid and Arcane Mage. We looked at those for a few weeks. Now we are into another week for us to check how things have been going in Mythic Plus. Of course, we are getting closer to the end of the season. As a reminder, the titles and rewards and achievements and whatnot of this season won't carry over in Season 4. The only thing that will carry over in Season 4, portals. If you complete plus 20 keys in Season 4, you will get your portals to Grimwell Depot, to Iron Docks, to Tazavesh, to Karazhan and to Mechagon. So with this being said, we can start looking at how things have been changing or not changing in Mythic Plus after a few more days have gone by. So when it comes to healers, we have gotten only one interesting thing. This is the only thing I will care about until the end of the season. In the keys, in very high level keys, the situation is still quite stagnant as usual. Holy Priest and Shaman are the main dominant healers, while the rest is very scarce to find in high keys. But what interests me is whether or not by the end of the season we are going to be able to see, even for just one reset, even for just a few days, Holy Priest passing Resto Shaman. Because this is, once again, we are getting new record by new record every week that goes by. This is the closest Holy Priest has been in high plus 20 keys being to Resto Shaman. Now they are at 1.9% away from Restoration Shaman. So my question is going to be, is this going to make Priest pass Shaman by the time we get into Season 4? My idea is that probably a few Mistweaver Monks, Resto Druid, Holy Paladins, which will also reroll. So when it's time to reroll, it's likely they will go for the currently stronger spec, which at the moment is Holy Priest. So I think by the time we get to the last week of this season, we might see Holy Priest finally pass Resto Shaman just before getting into Season 4. Of course, right as we get into Season 4, right as we start Season 4, Holy Priest will 100% be more popular than Resto Shaman. You know, this season Resto Shaman has been able to keep up their popularity because they were massively more popular than Holy Priest at the start of the season. In Season 2, nobody was playing Holy Priest, so Shaman was super popular from the start, and Holy Priest had to climb over time to get to where Shaman is. But from the start of Season 4, it's very likely Holy will just from the get-go be the more popular healer. For tanks, the situation is somewhat similar and somewhat depressingly similar, because it's Blood Death Knight still dominating. When you look at keys higher than 20, it's still a very nice picture. It's still very soothing, okay? It puts you at peace with the world when you look at the 5 tank specs being so close to each other, so spread, so evenly played, even at high-ish keys. Then, of course, once you get into the high range, the 25 range, Death Knight goes to be the most popular one. It's been growing over time. Now it is getting closer to the 42% range. Perhaps they might even reach 45% by the time we get into the start of the new season. Same logic for Holy Priest. If, as we get into the new season, we see there is no balance tuning nerfing Death Knight, it's much more likely that this percentage is going to be even higher. There's not going to be too many incentives for Vengeance Demon Hunters, Proc Paladins or Guardian Druids to stay in their spec as we get into Season 4. If they see right here, if they see how popular Blood Death Knight is. So that's going to be pretty much the same situation for tanks as it has been for healers. When it comes to DPS, okay, so DPS had a few buffed specs over time that we have been checking. We have been looking at how much they grew over time because of the buffs. So when it comes to DPS, the argument of the day last time was the growth of Outlaw. Of the buffed specs in melee, they were the one growing the most, together with Windwalker. Arms Warrior wasn't really growing despite the buffs, and in the end, Outlaw, even this week, they go from 3.3% popularity in Mythic Plus in keys higher than 20 to 4.1, so they are continuing to grow. The growth, of course, also continues in keys higher than 25, with Outlaw gaining from 6.3 to 7.3%. Growth of Outlaw, which can be even better represented in this graph, looking at the last month and a half or so of Mythic Plus. Ever since Outlaw got its initial buff, you can literally physically see the growth of Outlaw over time, going from the bottom. As a matter of fact, over there it's bottom 4. It's Affliction, it's Assassination, Beast Mastery, and then there was Outlaw right at the bottom, and then very quickly growing and poising itself to be a top 4 spec. As a result, Subtlety is the one that lost the representation, but not too much. You know, at the end of the day, Subtlety wasn't nerfed. At the end of the day, Subtlety didn't, you know, get gutted or hotfixed in any way. They simply lost that representation over to Outlaw, but it is still a perfectly viable spec, Subtlety is. Besides this, some more things to mention. Other specs are not changing too much. The only one that continues to grow, of course, is Survival, and the other buffed spec, which is Windwalker. Those are the only two specs that continue to be the dominant choice. We have looked at which specs to play for melee DPS. We have talked about this. If there is no balance tuning coming around, other than the already announced nerf to Survival, it's likely that Windwalker will just end up replacing Survival. So without any more balance tuning besides nerfing Survival, Windwalker seems to be the next in line for being the meta melee DPS for Season 4, for the last season of this expansion. Discussion might be somewhat similar when it comes to range DPS. So the range DPS we have been looking at with a mix of interest and disgust, because the buffed specs in the ranged role didn't really change anything. The two buffed specs were, first they were Arcane and Beast Mastery, and then after last week it was Affliction, buffed in 5% all damage. Now, as you can see this week, the buff to Affliction hasn't really changed too much, which is because, of course, when you have Destruction Warlock in your class, it kind of gets difficult to gain in popularity, even if you get buffed. Beast Mastery also hasn't really been gaining too much. It is still playing second fiddle to Marksmanship. Arcane also is not really changing. What we were really looking at though, however, was in the higher keys, once we go into the 25 range, that we started looking at Destruction breaking the 50% barrier, and then they were breaking the 51% barrier. Last time they broke the 52% barrier. So what happened this week? What happened this week is that they broke the 53% barrier. So we have a new record of representation for a single DPS spec being held now by Destruction. Week after week, they are now the back-to-back record breakers of this depressing statistic. Of course, very likely this percentage is bound to drop, to drastically drop by the time Season 4 starts. In fact, the same logic I pointed out to Holy Priest, perhaps in the next few weeks, is going to grow because more of the other healers are going to be re-rolling to Holy in preparation for Season 4. The same might be true for Blood Death Knight, where more of the other tanks might be re-rolling to Death Knight in preparation for Season 4. The same, in reverse, could be for Destruction. Perhaps some of the Warlocks might be preparing to reroll in preparation of the nerfs happening to Destruction. However, considering how solid of a class Warlock is right now, because you don't just have Destruction, you have Demonology, which has remained unnerfed and still very powerful in the raid, and still a decent, viable spec in Mythic Plus as well. So it's much less likely that Destruction is going to just completely drop in representation, depending of course on how rough, how brutal the nerf is going to be. However, the popularity will still drop regardless, so it's going to be interesting to see which of the other class, if at all, if those Destro locks aren't simply going to stay Demo, or maybe even Affliction, if they go to a different class, it is going to be interesting to see which one of the other classes will take advantage of this. This week is also the third to last week, of course, in Mythic Plus of affix combinations. It's gonna be close to anyone who wants to try to get any achievements you're looking for in Mythic Plus. 3k, portals, even the 1% title range you want to break. This week being fortified, it's going to be fortified, explosive, and raging. So it's going to be a very very trash intensive week. You know, Fortified of course makes things much harder in Mythic Plus in trash packs, especially for lazy groups. There is also Raging, which might make the more lazy comps be quite hampered a little bit more by the damage that can come out of trash mobs, especially because you're going to be looking at more enraged spells, right? Obviously, being with a survival hunter, being meta, is going to be easier to get a handy trunk shot on the mobs, but overall it's a good week. You know, we can't be too picky. There is only 3 weeks left, right? If you were looking to push a key for a certain level, it's not that you can start skipping weeks and be picky about it, because you don't have that many other options, that many other chances to do keys right now. After Fortified, Raging and Explosive, we're gonna get Tyrannical, Bursting and Volcanic. That's gonna be the last of the Tyrannical weeks, which is going to be very good because it's gonna be the best week. You know, out of the weeks we have got, very likely Bursting and Volcanic is pretty much the easiest one you can possibly hope for pushing Tyrannical. So next week is gonna be a very good Tyrannical push. The last week of the season is going to be Spiteful and Necrotic with Fortified. So versus Fortified, Raging and Explosive of this week, I would say the end week is still gonna be easier. So luckily, if you were still thinking about pushing keys, still having some goals for the end of the season, we have some 2 very easy, or rather one of the easier weeks right at the end of the season. The last affix combinations for Tyrannical will be quite juicy for you to push. This week is a little bit harder, okay? It's not as easy as those weeks. It's going to be a little bit more annoying. There are going to be some dungeons that will still be fine because they focus more about Tyrannical being harder for boss killing, so those dungeons in Fortified will still be manageable, like Necrotic Wake, of course. Plagueful is another notorious Tyrannical weak dungeon, so in Fortified it's still going to be much more manageable. Halls of Atonement, of course, is also a quite handy dungeon for Fortified. Same goes for Streets. Having multiple bosses, being able to blast through them in a Fortified week is very handy. And then of course you have the trash intensive, the trash difficult dungeons like Sanguine Depths, like Theater of Pain. Even the other side getting quite more complicated this week. I wouldn't sweat it, as I said. I wouldn't sweat it. I wouldn't force myself to push some higher keys this week if you were pushing for some goals by the end of the season, because you are going to have an easier week right by the end of the season. So do keys if you want, push as much as you want, but don't be forced. Don't feel too much the pressure of the end of the season, because we still have an easier Fortified week ahead of us as the last week of the season. Oh well, boys and girls, this is the sound that signals the end of our video. A round of applause as always to my patrons, of course, for supporting me and allowing me to continue to put out content. I hope you can all enjoy, especially now, especially now that we're getting close to the alpha and the beta of Dragonflight. We're gonna get much more busy with the content we have to push out, so knowing that I have your support will make things even smoother. Also, you can of course support this channel further by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel. For further sycophant behaviors, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as supporting me on Patreon at these links right down below. Becoming a patron will get you into my Discord server, while you can be in more direct contact with myself, yours truly. If you feel interested, in asking questions about future content, or feedback about previous content, or just about popping in to have a chat, I'm usually always available, generally speaking. With all this dealt with, it's time to say goodbye until probably tomorrow. Right, as usual. Thank you guys for watching, see you guys soon, and in the meantime, ah well, this forecast says I have about 1 more day before the heatwave, which will last for 10 full days. It's gonna be a miserable time. God damn it.